I think we're all here. So I'm going to have to go into my little script. So I would like to welcome everybody to the special meeting on January 28th, 2021. This is the school committee, and we're meeting sort of off cycle to tackle one agenda item. And thank you for joining us. So I need to go ahead and read a script. As a preliminary matter, this is Amanda Fargiano, Chair of the Hopkinton School Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Leah Batley-Rafferty.
Here.
Meg Tyler.
Aye.
Jill Markey.
Aye.
Nancy Kavanaugh is not with us tonight. She's absent, and I'm here. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Carol Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Jen Parson. Is Jen here?
She's not here.
Okay. And Susan Rotherman. I know we have Susan somewhere.
Yes, sorry. Yes, here. Sorry. I had to step away.
Okay. And tonight we are also joined by the town manager, Mr. Norman Kamalu, and our town CFO, Mr. Tim O'Leary, who are here to answer any questions and support us in our consideration of the motion tonight. So thank you for joining us. Let's see. This open meeting of the Hopkinton School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting tonight does not feature public comment. It is a special meeting off cycle for us just to, as I mentioned, take up one article or one motion. So we are not doing public comment tonight, but we will be back next Thursday, February 4th, and we'll welcome all sorts of public comments. For this meeting, the Hopkinton School Committee is convening by video conference as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM through one or many of its channels, and I believe it is available on HCAM, cable television, YouTube, and Facebook Live. And it is being recorded as always for viewing afterward. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided to members of this body and are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar unless otherwise noted. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will invite board members to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in colloquy with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. With that, I would like to invite you all to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, give us another week or two, and I think the whole town will be able to recite that entire script by memory. Okay, so we are here tonight with one agenda item, and that is to discuss a possible article for the annual town meeting warrant. The reason we are having a special meeting is that the warrant articles must be submitted by February 2nd. So in order to comply with that, we wanted to make sure we met in time. So with that, I would like to invite Ms. Rothermick to share with us some budget background and information.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen.
Are you able to? Because if not, oh,
1 minute. Yep.
great.
Okay, is everyone able to see this?
Yep.
Okay, so I'd just like to give a brief update, which will then lead into the discussion of the article that is presented for town meeting. So just to take everybody quickly through, let me move all your beautiful faces there. Just to take us quickly through the budget process timeline. Just as a refresher, the town manager, Mr. Khumalo, presented the draft FY22 budget on January 26th. On January 27th is the first iteration that comes out of the budget from the state, the governor's budget, which is presented on the fourth Wednesday of January. So you can see right off from the beginning, the town manager is presenting a budget before the first iteration of any revenue coming through from the state. Following through the rest of that process, now that the governor has presented that first draft, the House will now take up budget hearings and proposals between now, January through April. Then, of course, we have the town meeting for Hopkinton in May, and then the Senate budget hearings and proposals will take place between May and August. So you can see the constraints of where the town has to pass a budget versus where the state is in their budget timeline. So you can see the difficulty and the struggle and where we are constantly working with estimates as we move forward. And even after the Senate budget hearings, then that still goes to the conference committee for those proposals to be reconciled before that final appropriation comes through. So that's just a quick walkthrough in terms of the process of the state and how that folds in with where we are in the town of Hopkinton in our budget process as well. Ugh. Okay, so the budget that was presented by Mr. Khumalo on January 26th is a balanced budget using one-time funding of over $1.5 million. And this is really just looking at the tax impact, the 2.5 tax impact. So using that one-time funding, again, represents the structural deficit in funding the budget for the town of Hopkinton and basically the constraints of Prop 2.5. So the budget that was presented on Tuesday, this is where we were at that time. So as we keep stating, we're still very early in this process. So as we continue through this process and more information comes in, it will continue to have a ripple effect through the entire budget. So this is just a snapshot of some of the information that was presented on Tuesday by the town manager using the source of funds document. So the state receipts, the estimated receipts, you can see that as we move through the column, the FY21 sources of funds, the FY22 draft sources of funds that was presented on January 26th. And then on January 27th, what comes through on the cherry sheet on that first iteration of the budget and what those changes represent. So the state receipts estimate actually increased from the estimate that we were using as a town to what the governor put out. And the increase for the receipts was $782,000. The majority of that comes through on Chapter 70. The other side to that is there are assessments and charges that also are reflected on the cherry sheet. And that reflected a change of about $8,000. So you can see it's a positive change from the original estimate on January 26th to what the first iteration that we have seen come through from the governor of 790,000. And just for everyone's knowledge, the estimated receipts is not just Chapter 70. It's made up of a number of items. So you can see that is Chapter 70. It is charter tuition reimbursement. There's unrestricted government aid. There is veterans benefits, state-owned land, public libraries. Those are all the things that are part of those estimated receipts. And in terms of the assessments, the charges against what the town then has to pay are for projects such as mosquito control, air pollution districts, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, non-renewal surcharge, the MBTA, regional transit. So a number of items are charged against the town. So you have both the estimated receipts coming in and then these assessment and charges, which reduce that money. So as of using that same presentation, and just as a reminder to indicate how the information changes, one of the issues or one of the things that was put forward was the use of transfers from the general stabilization of the town and from the school stabilization in that last column of 774,000. In FY21, on the date of March 10th, we were also proposing using from the school stabilization 444,000. So very early on in the process to pass the FY21 budget, we also were looking to use that school stabilization. You'll see in that middle column, the final FY21 sources of funds, we did not. So here we are again, early in the process. And in order to balance the budget, there is an estimate of using 774,000 out of each stabilization. And again, these are those one-time funding, not a good way. This is what leads to those structural deficits using $1.5 million. So you can see there's a lot of things that will continue to change as we move forward. So the governor's budget reflects an increase of 744,000 in Chapter 70. A new grant was just put out literally probably the same day. Is the ESSER 2 grant to assist with reopening of schools. Hopkinton has an entitlement of 211,000. This is so early in the process, the application has not even been released yet. So the final rules around that grant are unknown at this time, but there are indications that you would have to share that allocation with vocational schools. So there are some constraints that would come in around that grant. And finally, that last budget, or the last bubble, is what would that final number be in the school stabilization transfer, if any? So all of these will continue to evolve as we move forward. And again, we're only at the governor's budget. If you reflect back, there are more iterations, and that could change that Chapter 70, and that could change that cherry sheet moving forward. So looking at the long-term forecast that was also presented by Mr. Khumalo on January 26th, also looks at the structural deficits looking forward. So the budget gap for FY23 is projected to be 2.9 million, in FY24, 4.2 million, and FY25, 5.6 million. One of the points that they also brought out is new growth right now is exceeding the revenue that's being raised through Prop 2.5. And so as new growth continues to shrink, it will really exacerbate this structural deficit moving forward. So it continues to highlight the struggles of where we are as a town putting these budgets forward. So again, just a reminder of the timeline and how early we are in that timeline. And after the governor's budget, you can see that the House number may change that number, and then leading into town meeting. But by town meeting, we have to have a number. And you can see then it continues to go down. But again, it's still early in the process. And as we continue to move along, it's just a reminder that all of this new information will continue to have an effect on the budget as we continue towards town meeting. So that's just an update on new information that all came through this week. If anybody has any questions.
Susan, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you for pulling that together and updating it with hot off the press updates from this week.
Yeah.
Members, do you have questions on this content before we talk about the motion?
I just want to thank her for putting it so clearly. It was really easy to understand what's going on, what we can expect, why we have to think about this. So thank you for that effort.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I really appreciate it. And to all those who partner with you in Town Hall too. I don't know, we often in Hopkinton talk about managing growth, and we think sometimes that happens on planning board or zoning. And as I think about it here, when we sit here and talk about the school budget, which represents half of the town's budget, more than half of the town's budget, this discussion here that we're having as we go through these meetings about budget is actually where we manage the town's growth. And the reason is, if we propose budgets that require borrowing from one-time sources, and those one-time sources aren't there the next year or in subsequent years, then we have to look to rezoning and developing other revenue sources in order to cover ourselves in the future. So as I look at this kind of big picture of how our budgets influence decisions made by the town overall for growth, I think it's something we ought to consider. If we value our open space, if we value the way that we develop today, and we don't want to introduce massive new development, then this is the board, this is the committee where that action is made, depending on whether we responsibly use one-time sources or not. Thank you again for sharing it, and I do recognize that even the update you have from the governor's office now, that's an estimate, because it still needs to go through the House and the Senate, which is no small feat, and we won't know by May the outcome of all that. So we'll be going on estimates at that point too. So thanks again, and that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Meg, did you have any questions? I guess my only question was, do we have any idea with the governor's proposal to what extent the pandemic impacted this Chapter 70 increase for our town versus enrollment or other factors? Do we have any, was there any narrative that went with this that would explain?
Not really outlining what would be COVID related.
Yeah.
It did say that it is funding year one of the Student Opportunity Act. So what was, that 7-year pay-in to increase school funding across the board, this did represent year one.
Okay. And I know the ESSER 2 you said was largely to enable reopening. It's sort of a new set of grant money for with reopening in the justification.
Correct.
Okay. I don't have any other questions on that material. I'm hoping that we could get put those slides up with our budget materials on the website. I think the community would learn a lot from. They can obviously watch our meeting over and over again, but if we can share those or make those accessible, that would be great.
Sure.
Mr. Kamal and Mr. O'Leary, did you have anything you wanted to say before we talk about the article that we have, sorry, the motion that we have on the agenda? We want to wait for us to ask you questions.
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, at this point, I have nothing else to add. Thank you, Susan, for a brilliant presentation.
Okay, so we're here today then, as Susan said, we need, if it comes to pass that when all the refinement is done between now and May 3rd, we still need to use one-time sources. In order to have access to making that even possible, we have to put an article on the town meeting warrant. I don't believe, and Mr. Kamal, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that we have to put a dollar figure to that right now, but I think we need a placeholder article that says that the schools would authorize, since we have to authorize this money, it would come out of the HCA, the Legacy Farms host community agreement funds, so that we would be willing to authorize this transfer to support our current budget. Because I think we said at our last meeting, when we voted the budget, we all talked about not seeing anywhere that we could cut. I mean, I think we've been through our budget. So in order to support the spending level that we think is necessary for next year, we, if we need this fund, we need to put an article on the town meeting warrant. That's what our discussion is tonight.
It does not need to have a number right now, Amanda.
Thank you. And I do remember vividly the many cycles of budget work last year as the pandemic unfolded, and and yet we were still adjusting from prior year growth with some of our headcount that had sort of carried forward that Dr. Kavanaugh talked about last week. So I definitely remember having that article out there, and then as the revenue picture became clearer, we didn't end up needing the money, which was wonderful.
Yeah, I was
So-
going to say, a lot of times when you don't need an article, you can just say the committee that said to put this article in says to vote it down, right? And so, yeah, this is not in any way a promise that we're going to grab money. It just gives us the placeholder.
That's correct.
Can I ask a clarification on that through the chair, or to the chair, I guess? We're voting to have an article on the May town meeting that would transfer the money to the school's control. Later in the year, we would then vote as a school committee whether or not we need that money.
No, I don't believe so. I think that we have already put forward an article. It's a good point of clarification. Based on conversations we had about unanticipated enrollment growth for the fall, we as a committee had put forward an article requesting $500,000 to be made available to spend, that would then require school committee vote to actually spend it. But in order to have school committee be able to actually spend it, the town, 2/3 of the town meeting attendees have to vote to put it in the fund that will enable us to spend it. So we had already asked for $500,000 from the stabilization funds in the event that we have unanticipated enrollment growth that we cannot fund within our budget. This request is, I believe, all the experts, please correct me if I'm wrong, but is to request an undetermined yet amount of money. Currently, it's hovering around $775,000, but again, through revenue refinement, that number will come into view as we move on. So it would move money from our stabilization fund to the general fund for the town. Am I correct?
It basically, in order to fund the budget that the school committee passed, there is not enough revenue to fund that budget to the level of the school committee's budget. So this stabilization would be to actually enhance the funding and fund the budget fully.
It would require no further vote on our part. It would enable that money to be spent for our operating expenses, for our budget, to cover our budget, which is different from the other allocation we requested, if that makes sense.
So is the other one still happening? Yes.
Yes,
It is.
Wow.
yeah. The other one says if we have 100 additional students and we need 7.4 teachers to serve those 100 students, that $500,000 would help us do that. This money is simply to help us balance the budget in a way that allows us to have the asks we've put on the table in our budget that you approved.
And thank you for the clarification. And what would happen then next if after this vote? Does it then go to the select board for a vote, or just goes on the warrant from us?
I believe it just goes on the warrant.
I believe the select board still votes all articles for the warrant.
But theoretically, I guess if we all voted budget just last week, I think it was, that we knew was putting us short $2 million from what we would get through 2.5%. Nothing, has something changed in the meantime, or this is just the impact of what we did? We voted a budget that was $2 million more than the town has without going to extra places for funding like this. Is that it?
That's it. When the consolidated budget was presented by Mr. Kamal on Tuesday, us with everybody else, they're just, there aren't that many different things to consider. It's revenue, expenses, and we have some one-time reserves. I mean, there aren't a lot of other, it's not really magic. We have to balance it. And so when it all comes together, there's a gap. So,
Oops, sorry.
no, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say what has changed is what Susan just demonstrated, that just under $1 million that were unanticipated have come into Hopkinton in the form of ESSER in Chapter 70.
I guess through the chair, I would like to hear more from the town manager or finance director, if he's still on their advice or recommendation or impact this has.
Mr. Kamala?
Yeah, through the chair, I think most significantly is the town stated position to support the school department's request as presented. We're very committed to doing that. And the budget that was presented to the select board on Tuesday presents a funding plan that incorporates the use of reserves. I think, as has been said over the last 15 minutes, we're very early in the process. And as we have seen in past years, the closer we move to town meeting, the clearer our funding source picture becomes. And we are hoping, as we just saw over the last 12 hours, that additional revenues are going to come into the town, and thus the town may be in a position to rely less on the reserves that we have currently identified in the funding proposal. And I think one other issue that needs to be said is that the scale of the one-time funding that we're looking at this year reflects a combination of what happened last year, where the town relied also on one-time funding sources to balance the budget, together with what's happening this year.
That's a cautionary tale, is what you're saying, that anything we do this year has multi-year impact.
Correct.
Yeah. One more clarification. Thanks for, I want to make sure I get all of this. So given that the governor's estimate now leaves us in a little less worse situation, in that came a day after the meeting with the select board on Tuesday. Is the 774 a lesser amount then to fill the gap, given that the governor's budget estimate came in a little higher than we knew on Tuesday night?
We are all hoping that the number that the governor presented in the #1 budget version of the state holds true throughout the process. What that therefore would mean for the community in Hopkinton is that we have a less amount in terms of the gap to be filled through the use of reserves.
So that's great. I think that answers my question then. So we had estimated that 774 from each of the select board and the school would be needed when we looked at it Tuesday night. But on Wednesday, the governor's budget indicated we have close to $1 million coming in. But we're still sticking with what we thought Tuesday night, which would be borrowing more from reserves than currently would be required given what we know now as of yesterday from the governor's estimate. And I wonder if we could be reducing to match the actual gap now that we have the estimate as of Wednesday, a day after the select board met, rather than sticking with the bigger one-time source funding that we thought we would need a day before the governor's estimate.
If I may just, sorry, I don't think that tonight we're voting a dollar amount. The budget is a work in process, a lot of work in process. Our friends here can attest to that, our financial friends. So we're not looking for a dollar now, recognizing that new information is coming in regularly. So I imagine that the town CFO and town manager will continue to revise the spreadsheets that they use as working documents. And maybe Mr. Kamala, if you can speak to what the next steps are with the select board. How does that come back iteratively to the select board?
If you don't mind, through the chair, I'd like to get an answer to that question, because in the slides that Mrs. Rothamish presented, it did still list the 774 from both sources. So I know we're not voting a number tonight, but even in the story that we're telling, is there a reason we wouldn't update with the new information we have from the governor's estimate from Wednesday?
Through the chair, if I may, Mr. Markey, there are two ways of managing the budget when information is changing. There is the conservative approach where as information changes, the budget preparers maintain the step one projections. And that is usually driven by, well, the House and the Senate and the reconciliation process may have a different number. So why make these switches serially if the information may actually be very different from where we are? So conservatively, the approach could be we maintain the step one projection number. The alternate is, and this is what we've done in the last 3 years, when the budget number comes from the governor, we adjust our projections. So to your point, when we produce the next iteration of the budget estimates, we will account for what we have learned through the governor's budget presentation or proposal, with an advisory note saying, and these numbers will also change as we learn new information from the House, Senate, and reconciliation process. Similarly, our new growth estimates may become much clearer as we lead towards town meeting, and we will adjust those numbers as we see fit.
Okay, thank you.
Amanda, just one comment.
ahead.
It's not necessarily about the article, but I think that this coming year, we should sit down a little earlier with the town manager and with the financial officer and really discuss what's going forward, because kids will continue, like the number of children in our schools will continue to grow. Hopkinton has a huge positive reputation. Parents with younger children are moving here. There's going to be sort of a steady growth in children. And because there's a steady growth in children, there has to be a growth in the budget. Like we you know, one goes with the other, even if you're trying to be very conservative. So we have to sit down and really think hard ahead of time of how to meet those requirements, because the thing we don't want is for children to come and have crowded facilities and have uncomfortable situations and have, you know, teachers teaching too many kids, etc. So I just wanted to say that I would really like to sort of sit down and really think ahead when we get towards the end of this process, so that we're all aligned on how to make it happen, that the growth that we have no way to control, right? Like the kids come, is accounted for correctly, so we aren't worrying so much about one-time funds and et cetera.
Duly noted.
I would say through the chair, I think we've done a pretty reasonable job with very early engagement across the town. This isn't the first meeting. We've been meeting since when? September or October on this. So still, to Leah's point, the growth in the population for students in the fall is one of the big unknowns. We can't do much with that. But I like the process we've had this year. I don't know if we could get much earlier without overlapping on this process. It's once a year, and we started pretty much in September on this.
And it's worth, as we do, refining our projections, looking at, our 10-year projections that we received from Dr. Wagman that have been refined, do show sort of it depends on the school, but overall a growth steadily from now to 2030. And, different schools at different times are really seeing more increase in the number of students, the lower grades first, and the middle school, and then the high school trail a little bit in the projections. But it is why we are very, very conservative as a board about the host community agreement money, because we know that it feels like we're in trouble now, but between all the factors that have been raised about the structural issues with our financial picture, we know that the challenges are going to be greater tomorrow from an enrollment perspective. So we, I think rightly, are very, very conservative in using that money, and I definitely appreciate the hesitance and that conservatism on behalf of the school committee, on the part of the school committee, and that we're not, running out and trying to spend that money all in year one of enrollment growth. We recognize that we have significant challenges coming in a few years. So, I think we definitely need to keep an eye on the long game, and we need to consider, issues. I don't know. I confess I don't understand enough about the formulas that go into Chapter 70. I could probably take a couple of graduate courses on it and still be confused. But I do know that as our enrollment numbers go up, as our need profiles change, as we have more, maybe English as a second language students and so forth, we do see increases. Perhaps that fed into the 745,000 in the governor's budget. I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me because we have seen so much growth. We have seen a change in the profile of the needs of our students. And some of that is, I think, in the calculations. I don't know, Dr. Kavanaugh or Susan, if you can comment if that's true or not.
Yeah, the way I understand Chapter 70 money is it does look at students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. It looks at our ESOL students. It looks at increases in enrollment, so that can constitute a change from one fiscal year to another.
So it may, it is, if it holds, it's just the governor's budget as of yesterday. So, we're very early, obviously, but it is encouraging that what we are feeling in the trenches in terms of, hiring, if you look at our hiring needs, our English as a second language teachers and some of the teachers that in the support staff that we're hiring, it's encouraging to see that while there's a lag, maybe the funding is coming through to support those students as well. And, I don't know, how the Chapter 70 will get allocated in the budget and how that works, but it's encouraging to see that, maybe some of the funding formulas are reflecting some of what we're feeling on, boots on the ground.
I just want to say thank you to you, Amanda, to Dr. Kavanaugh, Mrs. Rothermich, to Tim O'Leary and Town Manager Norman Kamala, because we, as we all rotate through these boards, we have to quickly ramp up on these financial issues, and their guidance and help from all of you is greatly appreciated. So the way I'm looking at this motion tonight is that this is a process that we are agreeing to move some amount from stabilization to fund the gap. which we don't know the amount yet, but we're agreeing in principle to use some stabilization money. Exact amount to be determined at a later date.
That's correct. And as Mr. Kamala said, we are recognizing that the town is showing a tremendous amount of support for the operating budget that we put forward. You know, we're not being asked to cut what we know are critical supports at this time. So,
And I would add it, but not more. Right. Thank you.
correct.
Joe, would you like to make a motion? You just phrased it so well.
No,
It's written in the agenda. I can read it if you like.
thank you while I look for it. Okay.
Or if you're going to make the motion, if you have it and want to read it, you don't even have to make it up.
It takes me a while to go through the email list here. Sorry.
I'll read it for you. The motion moved to add an article to the annual town meeting warrant to allocate funds from the school stabilization account to the town general fund for the purpose of supporting aspects of the fiscal year 22 school operating budget related to enrollment growth.
So moved.
You don't need it. So I will make that motion. So moved.
Okay, I'm going to take Joe's motion because I think he was intending to get there first. So motion by Joe,
Second.
second by Leah, and I need to do a roll call vote. Joe,
Aye.
Meg,
Aye.
Leah,
Aye.
and I'm an aye as well. And so we will pass that on to the powers that be to add to the list of town meeting articles. And Mr. Kamala, Mr. O'Leary, anything else for us?
Thank you. Thank you. This opens the door for support for the school budget. And so thank you for keeping this door open.
Thank
to
you.
both. Yes, and thanks all around. I mean, Tim, you and Susan work, like crazy on this. It starts, there's no end. As soon as you stop one year, you start the next year, and you're deep in this all the time. And I'm so thankful, Susan, for the work you did to put that presentation together, because in the time that I've been watching these meetings and attending these meetings and on this board, I think that was the clearest statement of kind of how this all works that I've seen, and it was very helpful, and I think the community will appreciate that as well. And Mr. Kamala, thank you. I know that I was hesitant to even invite you tonight because we all have so many night meetings, and there's a balance between annoying you with meetings and being grateful for your presence. But I'm very grateful that you came tonight and were here for us.
Thank you. As we prepare for our Super Bowl, which is our town meeting, we need to put in the work. So we're happy to be here.
Thank you. I think we're done with the meeting agenda. So at this point, I can take a motion to adjourn.
I will make that motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Meg. Motion by Meg.
Second.
Second by Leah. I'll do a roll call vote. Leah?
Yes.
Meg?
Yes.
Joe?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. And we are adjourned at 7:45. Dr. Kavanaugh, Ms. Rothermere, thank you very much. Mr. O'Leary, Mr. Kamalo, and school committee. You're always willing to come to these meetings. I appreciate it. And we're back at it next Thursday, February 4th. And it'll be a regular meeting, and we are excited. I think we're going to have an update from the students at the school council. They'll be back joining us, and I'm so thrilled. So thank you. Have a good week, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Good night,